Hello, everybody. Welcome to the YERME interview series, to the interview with the YERME board treasurer, Ghislaine Gueudet. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for the interview.
And thank you for inviting me.
So the interview will begin with a little background about Ghislaine and your work as a researcher and your path into the work you are doing now today as a professor in mathematics education and as a member of the YERME board and the responsible treasurer for the finances and work that is done for the European research in mathematics education. So once again, welcome to the interview and thank you very much for joining us today. I will begin with a brief introduction of you to the audience, so all young researchers get to know you and get a couple of insights into your background, which I presume will be also things linked back to during our conversation during this hour. So to begin with, in year 2000, you have graduated with a PhD in mathematics education at the University of Grenoble, Alps in France. After that, you have been working between year 2002 and 2008 as associate professor at the Teacher Training Institute in Breton. And somewhere there in your career path in France, is there a tradition of doing some kind of habilitation degree to become a qualified supervisor for PhD students, and also in a way as a part of a career path to become a full professor. So in year 2008, you defended this kind of qualification to supervise PhD students and also on your way to a full professor. And that you have done in Paris, in France. In 2009, and between 2009 and between 2020, you have been working as a professor in mathematics education at the University de Breton Occidentale. My French is not the best. And then since September 2021, you are having position as a professor in mathematics education at the University of Paris, in Paris Saint-Clair. As I mentioned in the beginning, you are also working as a board member for the YERME Society, and there you have treasurer responsibility. As my knowledge of the geographic parts of France is rather limited, still looking on this couple of lines here, I can see that you have been moving in France in between different universities. So would you like to give us a couple of insights about those different moves from one university to another?
Well, actually, I did not move so much because what you see in terms of education, the PhD and the habilitation, you said that habilitation is a tradition in France. It's more than a tradition, it is compulsory if you want to become a professor. It's a diploma, which is compulsory. So for these two diploma, I was in different cities, in Grenoble for my PhD and in Paris for my habilitation. But basically, I worked in Brittany, in the west of France. All this time, also for my PhD, I worked in distance, and this was the very old-fashioned distance work where I typed my PhD, but I sent by traditional mail the papers to my PhD advisor in Grenoble, who wrote some comments by hand and sent it back by the traditional mail. So it was a longer process, not instantaneous distant communication, but this is also interesting because we had more time to think about things at that period. But it was working at distance. I did not live in Grenoble. I was teaching at university, only teaching, not making research, but I was already in Bretagne. And the same for my habilitation in Paris with Michel Artigue, because at that time, Bretagne is a small part of France, and I worked in a small university where it was not possible to have habilitation in mathematics education. In France, the largest mathematics education team, called LDAR, is in Paris. It is located in Paris. So my real move from one city to another is very recent, when I changed position in September, and now I am presently in Paris-Saclay.
Okay, so thank you very much, Ghislaine, because that also gives a little wider insight into the path in your career, but also give us knowledge about that the distance learning or distance education, postgraduate education actually have been taking place before the digitalization have been so wide, and it was possible to do already and graduate from post-graduation and get a PhD, which you did already in year 2000, which is more than 20 years ago. So I think this is also very important to get to know that actually it has been done for many years, different technique, but still
very different.
Done. And the time for thinking is also very important. It was an extended time, but in a different time frame as a matter of communicating with the paper and pen, not with the keyboard and the digital letters. So thank you for this introduction to what I could take out from your CV, but also you fill it up with a context which is very important to get into before we are coming into the interview questions which we have prepared for you. So we will move now into the interview questions and concentrate us on your current work as mathematics education researcher, with the long experience as you have, and also working as you do now with the community and in the congresses of mathematics education. So the first question that I have for you is, what motivated you to become a mathematics educational researcher? Please tell us what motivated Ghislaine.
Well, the first thing I want to say about this is that it was never a decision I took. I never said, oh, yes, I want to become a mathematics education researcher. It was a long process. I first started as teaching at university level. I was full-time teacher at university level. And I was really shocked by the difficulties of my students, especially in linear algebra. I was quite young. I started teaching, I was 25, and I had a lot of hopes and dreams and beautiful ideas about linear algebra being so nice and simple and clear. And I thought I presented it so clearly to my students, and still they failed at the exam. So it was very naive, but it was really what I thought. So I wanted to search for answers to my question. And you know, in France, we have this structure called ERME. IREMS, it's Institute for Research in Mathematics Education, which have been created in 1968 during the modern math reform for teacher training. And in these institutes, you have mathematicians and teachers and some math educators working together. So I came to the ERME in my university and I met Jean-Baptiste Lagrange, who was the first researcher in math education I met. And I started to work with some colleagues about the teaching and learning of linear algebra. And I came across the book published by Jean-Luc Dorier about the teaching and learning of linear algebra. So basically what motivated me to become a mathematics education researcher was, on the one hand, Jean-Baptiste Lagrange, and on the other hand, this book written by Jean-Luc Dorier. I contacted Jean-Luc and I asked him, well, I told him I want to make a PhD with you, and he accepted. So, but still I didn't want to make it my job. It was just because I was interested and I wanted to understand the difficulties of my students. And after that, the things went one after another, and there was one position and I became accidentally a mathematics education researcher.
I think this is very, very important insights to get, that there's somewhere the inspiration or motivation always somewhere coming from some kind of sources, and your part, this is your personal experience as a teacher. I think is very
but also meeting these very insightful persons like Jean-Baptiste Lagrange and Jean-Luc Dorier was very important, and I think this is the story of each researcher because it's a very social activity.
Yes. Yes, and that's why it's very important to network together and
yes,
meet and exchange. Yeah. Yes, so that brings me to the part which is linked to your area of research. So you already mentioned little about it. So could you please shortly describe your area of research?
Yes, I would like just to set the scene with the global perspective, because I was trained in this tradition, French tradition of research in didactics of mathematics. So my area is within the didactics of mathematics, which means that the mathematical content is always very important, mathematical knowledge, and also the theoretical frameworks used to answer the research question. And well, with this background, I have two main topics, two main areas of research. The first one is about university mathematics education, and more precisely the transition between secondary and university. Recently, I've been working more especially about this transition for non-specialist students. Mm-hmm. And my other area concerns the interactions between teachers and resources for their teaching, mathematics teacher, and the resources they use, they design, they share for their teaching.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you also are involved in, or have been involved in, one of the topic groups on YERME congresses. Would you like to, is that also, as I understand it, link it quite much into the area of the research you are working with?
Yes, for many years now, I'm involved in the team for Group 14 about university mathematics education.
Mm. Yes, and so this is like the red thread, as we say in Swedish, is coming for many years into the teaching at the university level, where you actually began yourself as a teacher.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I have participated in other groups. I have even been chair of the group about technology and resources at YERME 6 in Lyon. But because when university mathematics education, it is only a level. But within this level, you can have a lot of questions and issues. And if you work, for example, about assessment with computers at university level, you can participate to the group about assessment, or about technology, or about university mathematics education.
Specifically going into the deep questions about the assessments or about the technology, and that is also making your research area very, very wide, but also very specific in linked to the university level, which I think is also very important insight, that through your career or through your work in a specific part of math education, you are still working with different parts, which links to your research interests and the work you're working with. And that also creates an insights for young researchers who might be listening to the interview, that it's not just straightforward path, it also brings richness in the work as a senior researcher, to be involved in a couple of different working groups, for example, on the Congress in math education, but also within your own research, which I could see when I've been looking on your list of your publications, that you are moving in between this with both assessment and the technology and university level. So thank you very much for giving us insights into you, which is a very short description at that point of your area of research for so many years. So a bit more relaxed question regarding of your overall work. So what do you enjoy the most about your work?
Well, I enjoy a lot of things actually, but I think there are at least two different kinds of things I really enjoy. The first kind of thing is more at the individual level. I enjoy trying to answer to questions. It's the inquiry aspect, like a policeman or something like this. I want to know what is the answer to this question, and I am free to decide about my data collection, to decide about how I analyze the data, and I love to be in the middle of a lot of data and trying to find the answer to my question. So this is the individual aspect, and the other aspect I enjoy a lot is working with someone else, with experienced colleagues, or with young researchers, with my PhD students, and discussing, confronting ideas. I think it's really very productive to work collectively.
Thank you. So I think it's also very important to hear from a senior researcher that what you're really enjoying as working with as mathematics education researcher is more than one level. You said about your individual things that fuel you to move to work forward and develop the knowledge and contribute to the field in math education with the research, but also, which I think is very inspiring to hear, that part of your work is also to work with others, both PhD students, other colleagues, networking, and that also which brings you into this enjoyable part of the work as math education researcher. That brings me into this question, which is linked to this with pros and cons of the work of any kind of work, but maybe especially in the field of research or in education, which is about what would you classify as something which is less enjoyable for you in that work you are doing as researcher in math education?
being a mathematics education researcher, at least in France, it does not exist as such as a job. You have to be a professor. As professor, you have to have responsibilities. I'm responsible directing a team of research, and I'm representing my colleagues in different councils at the university. So I think that what I really enjoy the least is attending boring meetings and thinking all the way, when will it stop? I'm losing my time, and I would losing my time to make research, and I will be obliged once again to stay up late at night to do my research. But this is not really the activity of a mathematics education researcher, but you cannot avoid it to have this job as professor. But this does not concern research. Within research, what I find the most difficult is when you receive a paper submitted and you have these major revisions requested, which happens with almost each paper I send to any journal. And you receive all these different reviews with different requests for modifications, sometimes not coherent, one when not compatible and going in different directions, and always asking to explain more, but please keep the length limited. And so this is the most difficult. Once you really entered the revision process and you decided what you are going to change, what you refuse to change, and try to explain to the reviewers that no, you will not change this because it's what it's coherent, and then it's better. But the first time, you know, when you receive the decision letter and you read it and you say, oh my God, all this work again, I do not enjoy this, clear.
But however, after you made the decision and then you twist that back to this, what you really enjoy the most. And I think this is very important to find that balance in when you're receiving a back review of your paper, even you as a very experienced senior researcher, also struggling with that, but turning it into back to this individual experience of enjoying the work you do as a researcher in mathematics education. So those moments of it's not very fun of reading the review, you're finding something and twisting it back to this is really on my individual level what you are working with. And I think this is very, very insightful to hear from you about that. There is a ways to do it, and one example is, and I also believe that the administrative work one way and another is needed to in the community, at the university you're working on, and also probably globally if when you are involved with others, that some decisions must be taken to move forward in the part which is most enjoyable as a researcher. So thank you very much for that. And that actually brings us to the next part, which is about, based on your experiences which you share with us, with your area of research, with your what you enjoy the most in your work as a researcher, and also what motivates you to become and being a researcher in math education. We will go into the questions which actually are based on your experience, which we spoke about that. So which advice was or would have been helpful at the beginning of your career?
Well, I was lucky enough to receive many very good advice. So I'm not thinking in terms of would have been, but there are some advice I keep in mind and think very regularly still now. In particular, advice about writing papers and how to write a paper. The first time I wrote with some colleagues, but young researchers like me, we decided to write a paper between us with no help of a senior researcher for the first version. And after we received this major modification request, we worked with Michel Artigue. And Michel Artigue told us, well, one of the problems with your paper is that it is boring. So nobody wants to read this. You have to put some suspense. You don't have to announce the results from the beginning, but say, oh, we want to find this, we want to find the answer to this question, and write it like a police novel or something like this. And I always think about this advice now when I write papers. Mm-hmm. Will the reader find this really boring? And how can I involve the reader more by, yeah.
So would that be some kind of a cliffhanger which makes people turn to the next page, kind of? Is that,
yes, not so easy to have a cliffhanger for mathematics education paper, but yeah.
No, but would that be something which will make people to know, oh, I want to continue reading? Yes. I think this is
yeah, and I think more generally, always keeping in mind your reader. When you are writing, try to step back and think, okay, will the reader understand this? Will the reader read so many pages? Can I be more synthetic to make the reading easier? Or all this comes from this original advice from Michel Artigue.
Yes, I think, yes, that is something which your experience also helped to develop, and that what, because the paper is to someone to learn from what you learned. And I think that, thank you for this, because it is in a way also is inspiring those who listen to the interview with you, that to actually try to understand the reader and or help or support yourself within the process of writing to at the end support the reader to understand what you are actually trying to say or saying. And I think this is very important. That also might not be a cliffhanger, but this is also a way of developing the writing skills, which I think is, from my perspective, might be one of the most difficult tasks we have as researchers. So that is how I understand you, because you're saying you still are working on it continuously with when you are writing, to think about this part as example with the reader in mind. So thank you, Ghislaine, for that. And that brings us into the research in reading. So one of the advices or things that you mentioned was about writing a paper, what you think about. But so we go to the next thing, which is about, could you please name 3 articles or books which every researcher in math education should read, and tell us 1 or 2 sentences about why?
Yes, it was a difficult task, made me think a lot. It's easier to cite 30 than 3, but well, finally I thought about a work a collective work that has been done by the European Mathematical Society together with the ERME Society, and I was involved in this work with a group of much more experienced colleagues. And we wrote a series of papers called Solid Findings. These were short papers written for mathematicians to present solid findings in mathematics education. I think that at least the first paper should be known by every researcher in mathematics education, because it summarizes a reflection about what is a result in mathematics education. The expression solid findings is itself paradoxical, because if it's not solid, it's not a finding. And this paper explains why and what we call solid findings. It refers to criteria presented by Alan Schoenfeld, but it also develops these criteria. So I think it is only 3 pages long. So I can really recommend to every researcher to read it. And then the other texts about solid findings naturally are interesting as well. There are 12 other texts.
Thank you, Ghislaine. And I would like to actually link to the audience who might be listening to your interview to also look back to the interview with Frode, because Frode, he mentioned that we should all read What is Mathematics? And then actually on a philosophical level, actually think and answer that question for ourselves in regards to our own research in math education, what mathematics is. And you are kind of giving another part of the whole work as a researcher, which with the example of the first paper in what is a result in mathematics education. And so what will be what is one advice or suggestion you always give to your postgraduate students as a supervisor?
Well, I could say that I give them the advice that has been given to me, and I do this actually, the advice from Michel Artigue I mentioned earlier. I don't want to keep it for me. The other advice I always give to my students is about the balance between participating to all these very interesting social activities like conferences, congresses, online meetings, and the need to keep enough time for a real deep work of analysis, of data collection, of reading enough papers published. And it's not only with conferences, but also naturally with publications. It's always difficult for a researcher to find a good balance between what is published, what is communicated, how much time you spend meeting colleagues, and the time really needed to be seated and to reflect deeply, and not only with an aim of publication or communication. And this is very difficult for the young researchers because they are searching for positions. I am now in the most comfortable stage in my career. I will not have any kind of further promotion. I'm at the end of my career and I still have in front of me 10, 15 years to do exactly the research I want. So this, for me, the balance is easy to find. Well, not so easy, but easier. For a young researcher needs to publish, to have a CV that will make possible to attain new positions, and but still there is a need to avoid this run for permanent publications and communication, because the communications become just empty if you did not at some point stop, stay in your office, read, go in schools, and even transcribe your interviews, etc., etc.
Yes, yeah, and that I think this is very valuable advice and help. I presume young researchers needs to get to actually find that balance, because the work is overwhelming from being in your own data in the office, but also being as part of the huge community at the conferences, but also finding the balance in the knowledge founds that are in the publication, reading and learning from the different. So thank you very much. I think it's a very valuable advice, which you actually passing forward to the next, to the youngs, and I can pass forward to the next. So thank you for those insights. So based on once again on your experiences, so in your opinion, Ghislaine, what are the key topics and challenges for future research in education, especially in math education?
Yeah, this is again a difficult question, but the key topics, I would say, the first thing I want to say is that math education is a very recent science. So we don't know much. We know only very, very tiny things. And I remember Gérard Vergniaud, who was a very experienced researcher, and he always told, but we know such small part of these very complex questions about teaching and learning issues. So it's difficult to describe the key places to explore when you know that only 1% of the world is known or something like this. Mm-hmm. But I would say that I have always been very impressed of the power of math education research to be able to identify what is missing or what could be different. I will try to make myself clear. For example, I worked about teachers' resources, as I mentioned earlier. And for me, one of the most important questions about teachers' resources is what resources are missing. And this is also a challenge, because it is very challenging to identify something that does not exist but could exist. And I think that if something is key, it's this kind of things, trying to understand what could be different, but it concerns every area in mathematics education. It's not an area, it's a kind of question. Trying to identify what is not there and could be there and why it is not there. This is more for the research itself. And in terms of challenges, it is more about the mathematics research education community. It is really challenging to try supporting the emergence of communities of researchers in less affluent countries, or countries where these communities are very reduced or have institutional difficulties. And this is something that we work on with the ERME board, as you know, supporting some initiative in Eastern Europe, for example. But it's also on the agenda of ICMAI with countries all over the world. I'm co-editor-in-chief of the journal called E.G. Rumi about university mathematics education, and we receive almost never papers coming from Africa, for example. And this is a real problem, I think, and a real challenge for our community.
And that might also link to what you began with about the key topics that we actually, the area of expertise in math education is a new field, or relatively new field, and we still learn a lot. And if we do not learn from the research of certain, like you said, from African countries, we might miss the complexity in the research field. And I think this is what you are saying. is what I step in and said, this is a huge challenge, but by talking and lifting the challenge as you did, also opens up the need of thinking about what we are not thinking about, what we, as you said, what we are not seeing yet, and why we are not seeing it. I understand that, and I think I appreciate you lifting that, and even and also that we are, or you as an editor in a journal, see that we do not receive research for certain communities, and that is a challenge for the future in research in mathematics education, because we need to also learn from that to expand the knowledge. And I very much appreciate that. And as you said, it is very important to work with emerging communities within the European Society for Mathematics Education. And that will bring me to the part or last question in here, which also might link to this with future research, is about what is your biggest takeaway or learning from the past 6 months? Can be work related, but does not have to be in now we are past, or in some we talk about past pandemic, but maybe it's not really past pandemic. But please share with us something which is linked to your takeaway or learning from last 6 months.
Well, in the last 6 months, a little bit earlier, I have been following a student who did a master degree linked with gender equity in mathematics. And more precisely, she worked about in the context of first year of university, about a specific device, a project-based course where groups of students investigate together a topic in relatively advanced mathematics using also programming. And she was interested in gender equity, so I worked with her and I read a lot of works that I didn't know in mathematics education, outside mathematics education, and we worked together about how to take into account the content, the mathematical content, when you have questions in terms of gender equity. Because most of the studies, some studies are outside mathematics education, written by sociologists, psychologists, or even in math education, you have more quantitative studies with questionnaires and surveys where the girls declare that they have less self-efficacy, they are more anxious about their performance in mathematics. All this is known, but how in a collective work the women and men work together, what happens linked with the content, how the responsibilities are shared in a group, this is not really known. And I learned a lot about this working with her, and I plan to go on working with her in the next years. Well, it's, how to say, it's more at the stage of hypothesis, because if you want to observe very precisely how the work is shared for a given mathematical and programming content in a group where you have some boys, some girls, you have to spend a lot of time taking videos, making interviews, and it's difficult to have a quantitative study. But it's really interesting to see that they take different responsibility towards the knowledge. And this does not depend on their performance in mathematics or in programming. it's really a matter of difficulties with this gender equity, which is not supported by the teachers, at least in France and at least at university level.
Thank you, Ghislaine, for those insights, because that is also linking back to both what you were carrying with you through the interview about what actually we began with, what motivated you, the meetings, those advisors you had at the beginning of your career, but also that now when you are in the middle of your career, also as you said, you are you can research on what you want because you are now in the position as full professor in your career, but you still are taking with you or away with you together with your master students. And I think that is something very, very insightful to hear from an advanced or senior researcher, that actually the takeaways are kind of circulating through the career by giving and taking, and actually working with master students. That's what you share with us here. So thank you very much for this example of a takeaway or learning you brought into this interview. And as a last part of our talk, we will go into the little more private corner from you. So how do you spend your time offsite work? You mentioned that you sometimes working late nights, and that is something which you are passionate about because you, as you said, you enjoying it. But so how do you spend your time outside work?
I can work late nights because my children are grown now. They are around 30 years each. I have 2 children, but now they're around 30, so I have more time at night. But I always love being with my family, with my husband, with my children, brother, etc. And I think we spend quite a lot of time cooking, because I'm in France, and the French tradition is not only about mathematics didactics, but also about oysters, scallops, and all nice things we like to prepare for dinner. And I also like sailing. I'm lucky enough to have a sailing boat still in Brittany. So I go back to Brittany, and I'm happy when the weather is good enough to go out on the sea and have no internet access and be really somewhere else.
Being somewhere else. And I think that is also very important corner of the life, to be with the family and spend time with the loved ones. So a little also on a private corner, a question which I have spontaneously added in to surprise you in a way. So a question about, so when was the last time you did something for the first time? You might get yourself a couple of seconds or a minute to think about, and if there's something you have been doing for your first time, even if as a very experienced researcher in math education, but maybe also on the private corner. Please choose.
Well, it always depends on the scale you choose for this first time. Well, this Saturday I went to a market to buy strawberries for my strawberry jam, and it was the first time I visited this market. So it's it's not the first time I go to a market to buy strawberries. And last week it was the first time I worked with an experienced researcher about gender equity, but it's not the first time I work with an experienced researcher coming from another field than mine. So I have first time every day almost.
Yes, thank you very much, because this is also a little might be a little a corner, a little from the private corner, but at the same time you integrated the private, as you share with us about cooking or interest of cooking, and but also that you also are doing new things as a researcher, as you mentioned, as working with on a gender issue or with another researcher. So thank you very much, and that brings us to actually the last question on the list is linked to the young researcher community. So anything else from what we spoke about you would like to share with the young researchers community, with the YERME?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to share is my congratulations, because I think it is a beautiful and wonderful community that with so many different things organized and always new ideas. And in the ERME board meeting, it is always very interesting, this moment when we talk about the ERME community. So I think you have to continue this excellent activities of the YERME community. And then what I wanted to share really is I think you have a very important responsibility as young researcher or as a future experienced researcher, because you are our future. ERME is really for Europe, and I think research, but you said that at the beginning also, research is really a cultural activity. We know that teaching, learning are cultural, that the textbooks are different from one country to another, but we also know that the research activity itself is different from one country to another. But as I said before, when you're editor of a journal, you know that the papers you receive do not come from all the countries all over the world, and even for YERME, if you compare the number of papers from the USA to the number of papers we receive from Europe, it's not balanced. It's still not balanced, and we did a lot to invite more authors from Europe. So this recognition, this preserving the identity of the European community, or of each country also within this European community, it is very important, and it is in your hands as young researchers and future experienced researchers.
Thank you very much, Ghislaine. And I think that is actually what you share with us now, and what you are actually telling us as a kind of is I think is a part of a motto of actually both sharing the knowledge of the experienced researcher with the young researchers, but also a continuing of that work and the awareness of a need of learning from the community, and that is very important, and that is also one of the very important part of the YERME interview series. So I would like to say thank you to you on behalf of myself and Dylan, but also on behalf of young researchers who are listening and getting insights into your experiences. So thank you very much for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and also because I have been allowed to prepare and to have most of the questions in advance. It really made me think a lot about my own activity, and I do not often have this opportunity. So thank you also from me.